My name is Thomas Fabian. I'm Chief Commercial Vehicles Officer with ACEA, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, here based in Brussels. Today's topic is the electrification of fleets, heavy-duty fleets, and I'm delighted to welcome three distinguished guests here who are at the forefront of the decarbonization journey of this important industry. We have Andre Kranke, who's Head of Corporate Research and Development with DACHSER. We have Alexander Jensen joining us, who's Divisional Sustainability Manager, Road Transport, Road Sustainability with DSV. And we also have Michael Scheib joining us, Head of Product Management, Daimler Truck AG. Before asking them to take the floor, let me just make a few remarks. Just before summer break of this year, the globally most comprehensive and ambitious CO2 reduction targets have entered into force in Europe. By 2030, CO2 emissions of newly registered heavy-duty vehicles have to be 45% lower than they were in 2019. This requires a significant number of zero-emission vehicles, especially in the most relevant segment, that is heavy-duty long-haul truck-trailer combinations, with 40 tons today and often 120,000 kilometers annual mileage. In the first 6 months of 2024, zero-emission registrations in this segment stood at close to 2% in the medium and heavy-duty segment. Obviously, the market uptake has to accelerate significantly to at least 1/3 of the zero-emission vehicles by 2030. So, in a total market of about 250,000, 300,000 vehicles every year, we're talking close to 100,000 new zero-emission vehicles that have to be registered every year in about 5 years from now. That is quite a staggering number. Now, against this background, I would like to ask first Andre Kranke of DACHSER and then Alexander Jensen of DSV to take the floor. What are your views? What is the state of zero-emission vehicles in your companies? Are you investing, and why? What are your experiences so far? So quite a range of interesting questions that we would also like to discuss at the later stage here with the audience. We have close to 100 participants in this webinar. And with that, one last housekeeping remark. We have the Q&A open here for the audience. So please type in your questions and comments, and we will raise them in the discussion. That said, Andre, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And we have started our transition in 2018 with our first zero-emission delivery zone in the city of Stuttgart. That means to deliver zero-emission every shipment of zero-emission trucks to the inner city of Stuttgart. And that was our starting point for our zero-emission journey in 2018. At the moment, we have established 14. Can you hear me well, or is this a problem with sound?
No, we can hear you.
Okay,
good.
At the moment, 14 cities in Europe, which we are providing this zero-emission approach. That means only zero-emission trucks are entering the inner cities, for example, of Hamburg, of Freiburg, and some other German cities, but also in France and in Portugal, in the Nordics, and so on. And at the end of this year, we will complete this first rollout by the end of this year with 24 cities. And it's based on battery electric short distance trucks, and these trucks are available. They have between 7.5 tons and 18 tons, and the trucks works very well. The drivers are very satisfied to drive these trucks, and the performance and of course the range works very well for us to provide this service. But to be honest, of course, it's more expensive at the moment. That means we have to invest sort of 2 to 3 times more capex into the trucks, and it's not easy to get back the money from our customers. In the long distance topic, we have started last year our journey with our first tractors for the semi-trailer transport and for slip body transport with zero-emission trucks. We started with our first tractor with a range of 200 kilometers. Then we come to the next step with a truck with 300 kilometer range, and next year, the next generation will enter our network with a range of 500 kilometer range, all battery electric trucks. And I think so 500, 600 kilometers at the moment for us. So the state of the art for maybe for the next 2-3 years. And we will increase the number of these kinds of trucks in our network. We, in addition, working on hydrogen fuel cell zero-emission trucks. At the moment, there's one in operation, and we plan to put some more in the networks in the next years, but they are not on the same technology level like battery electric trucks at the moment, so that I think we will see this technology more in the end of this decade. In total, we have at the moment 90 zero-emission trucks in operations. That's not so much when you have in mind that we are talking about more than 10,000 trucks every day, which are in operation for DACHSER. That's not our own trucks. Most times we work together with a lot of service partners. So we had to make a conclusion. We had a starting point of this transition, and at the moment we are learning. And the most important learnings we have to do is not regarding the trucks. It's more than the charging infrastructure. So we are working in a very deep way on how to charge the trucks in our branches, how to manage all the electricity we need for it. We are talking with all of the grid providers. We are increasing the grid connection. We are investing in new transformers, in smart load management, and so on. So that's what at the moment our pain point is, the charging infrastructure and the electricity supply, because at the moment there's more or less no public charging infrastructure, for trucks available. So that's in a very brief way where we are standing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Andre. That is very interesting. And before opening the floor for the discussion, I would first like to invite Alexander Jensen of DSV to take the floor. And I think you also have a few slides for us now. Alexander, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm the Sustainability Manager for our Global Road Division, working with decarbonizing our activities in the countries DSV operates in. DSV has a global target of reducing our own emissions by 50% by no later than 2030. But more importantly, for an asset-light company, we have an additional target of reducing our Scope 3 emissions, so that is our subcontracted emissions, by 30% in the next 6 years. And in DSV, we don't own very much. We rely on hauliers, subcontractors, and carriers, which means that more than 93% of our emissions is stemming from our subcontracted partners. So it's a huge task at hand we need to achieve in a very short period of time. Earlier this year, we revealed our detailed roadmap for how to achieve these decarbonization targets. You can see it here on the left. Battery electric technology is by far the technology that's going to deliver the most substantial part of reductions in the next 6 years. It's the technology that we here in DSV relies more and more upon, and which we aim to accelerate and deploy increasingly in the next 6 years. For this year and next year, we're going to deploy more than 300 battery electric trucks. Some of you might have seen that a few weeks ago, we made public an agreement with Volvo to supply some of these trucks, and we are increasingly engaging with other manufacturers as well. And in the years afterwards, we're going to increase that share to even more, aiming for having more than 2,000 battery electric trucks operating for DSV by 2030. We, of course, rely on a mix of technologies. You know many of them. There's some bridge solution as well, HVO, best-in-class diesel truck, which can ensure high efficiency, but by far, from our current roadmap, the electric truck plays the major role. There are some obstacles in this. Much of it is more easier said than done. Infrastructure, as mentioned earlier as well, is of course a key focus for DSV as well. We try to utilize our size and also the sites we have around the world to install charging infrastructure that enables our subcontractors also to easily transition to an electric vehicle. But then, of course, relying so heavily on our subcontractor and hauliers, we engage with them, trying to ensure the necessary framework conditions should also become attractive for them to invest in this new technology and deploy it. And then continuously going forward, we of course monitor evolution in all technologies, seeing how they impact our roadmap. Then just briefly showing you, we of course want to do this in a clever and smart way. Infrastructure plays a huge role, getting grid capacity, energy capacity, but also national policies and legislation plays a major role in our ability to deploy this technology. Therefore, in DSV, we have identified some key countries which have the most attractive framework conditions for deploying these trucks. And those are the ones you can see here. This year and next year, the countries highlighted on this map will play the major role in ensuring that we get these more than 300 battery electric trucks out and running in our fleet. Our hope and ambition is, of course, that going forward and as the technology mature and policy and customers as well, we can expand this map and at the end of this decade ensure that electric trucks is an integrated part in how we operate at DSV.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alexander. Can I ask a very quick question here? You mentioned you'll aim for 2,000 electric vehicles to be in operation by the end of the decade of your own operations. What is the share of the total number of vehicles of these 2,000? Yeah. Just a ballpark figure.
Yeah, it's unfortunately not a number we've disclosed. I mean, we rely heavily on our hauliers and subcontracted fleet, and we are one of the largest. And as you might heard in the news, this can maybe even change further in the next year. So it is a substantial fleet that operates for DSV, going from 300 to 2,000. I mean, it's a huge task. It needs a lot of infrastructure, a lot of energy, and a lot needs to happen. But I mean, honestly, I can still say that by the end of this decade, we won't have done what we need to do to achieve net zero by 2050. So there's still a huge task at hand, ensuring further electrification going onwards from there.
Excellent. Very well. Thank you. Thanks very much, Alexander. Before opening the discussion, and please, I see there's a couple of questions already in the chat. Please do keep them coming. Let me hand over first to Michael Scheib of Daimler Truck and ask him to share his perspective. Michael, where do you see the truck market heading? Where is it today and where is it heading with respect to zero-emission vehicles? You have the floor.
No, first of all, thank you, Thomas, for having me. Let me see, I have to say that I hear myself. Makes it a little bit weird. So I'm muting myself talking and then I put it on again. So, yeah, I think if you have been on IAA last week, you see where the trucking industry is heading to. So we as Daimler Truck, the global manufacturer, we are fully committed to the Paris Agreement. And if you look at our lineup, we today already have 11 zero-emission vehicles in our product lineup, meaning they can be bought and be run today. And I would say the majority of our investments, that's part of my job, we really push into zero-emission technology. Because our goal 2039 and beyond, we only have vehicles offered to our customers who are carbon neutral. And we have to start the journey now full steam. And it's for us not really the question, if this has to be done, it's more the question how to do it. And you've heard from customers for me right now that they are starting getting into this. And I also think, again, if you very present, go back to the IAA, you see the truck models and also our, well-known competition that we are at the point that the trucks and the products are there, at least from a battery electric perspective. I agree with Andre. We talked about it in the two of us last week that on the hydrogen side we maybe have more maturity to gain on the truck side. But for both of these products, I think what we see more and more on the Daimler side, and I think we share that opinion with our OEM colleagues, is that we have to look much more beyond the truck, and we have to look at a very integrated approach if we as a society, not industry, want to really make that change happen, especially if it comes to the electric side, if it comes to the build out of the network, the build out of the charging stations, but also on hydrogen. I can tell you that the maturity of these vehicles will be there in a few years, and the big question for us is if we have the infrastructure there and ready, because without cooling vehicles, you will not be able to run it. And I think that's how we, Daimler, and also as an industry, look at it right now. I think the technology is partly ready, will be ready if it comes to H2 in a few years. The question is the rest of the ecosystem ready to make that change happen?
Thank you very much, Michael. Indeed. I hear it's a bit difficult to understand your audio, so perhaps there's something we can do about this, but let's I mean, I did understand you, so let's take it from here. I would now, after these introductory remarks here from the participants, I would now invite everyone to join this and open the discussion here. I would particularly ask the three panelists here, what is working so far? So perhaps, Andre, if I can start with you. You definitely started early with this transition, and you made some experiences, but why are you investing in zero-emission vehicles now? I mean, you're not running a how do you say an exploratory discovery enterprise here. You're running a logistics company, so you're not in trying to identify the newest technologies possibly, but rather run a viable business. Why are you investing now?
Yeah, sustainability and especially climate protection is one of our key strategies because we are a family-owned company and our shareholders has a very big contribution to sustainability and climate protection. That's the reason why we have the mission here, where we started very early with the mission to change our driving concepts because in 2016 and 18, when we established our first DACHSER emission-free delivery zone, it was more a topic not of carbon emissions, it was more a topic of air pollution in cities. So it was the main topic to come to less air pollution, and especially in metropolitan areas. But of course, in 2018, the additional focus came up with the global warming and the climate protection topics, and we started a very big climate protection project, and I'm the head of this project for many years. And yeah, zero emission technologies, and especially here zero emission trucks, are the only way to achieve the goal of net zero emissions, and that's the reason why we are working on this topic, why we are working together, for example, with the truck industry to develop such technologies which will lead us to zero emission. It's a hard way, it's a long way, but it's part of our sustainability mission. That's the answer of the why question.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And can I ask, that's also part of the questions that have been raised here in the chat. What is working so far? I mean, the vehicles, you mentioned 90 zero-emission vehicles that are in operation at the moment, right? Across different cities, mainly. Is this a viable, profitable business for you?
No.
Is this working?
Not from the cost side. To the moment, we have to pay more for these operations than we would use in diesel truck, especially in the cities. But as you know, there are some cities in the next year. We see this in the Netherlands, where we see some truck bans to enter the cities, and especially for the city topic, we have additional cost. And then
That's good. We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Technical problem again, sorry. And
You might need to adjust the mic a little.
Okay. Maybe
I think half of the trucks are in cities, half of the 90 trucks are in inner city operations, and the other half is, I would say, in operation with 300 kilometers range. That's at the moment the possibility we have. That means regional transportation, and next year we will see this for 500 kilometer range. That means some kind of long distance trucks. And here maybe we will reach in the next years, hopefully a point where we have hopefully the same cost like a diesel truck, but that depends from the cost of electricity. It's very different in the European countries. That depends of the truck toll. That's very different in the European countries. That depends on the residual value of the trucks and so on. So I think hopefully we will see that the cost will be equal in some years with the diesel truck, but at the moment not.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Here's one question from the Q&A from the chat box here is what's your experience with the reliability of the battery electric vehicles? I mean, these are obviously for manufacturers. They have been around for a little while, but they're still new products, of course, right? So everyone is learning here. But do you have any insights to share on reliability?
It's for me the question, huh?
Yes, please.
So the first months every time were not so great. So it's the first months every time we have some trouble, especially if it was the first kind of truck we bring into operation for short distance or long distance and so on. Very often some very small topics with the electronic, the connection to the charging infrastructure and so on. So, but when we, after some weeks or months, we overcome this first topics, that's normal for new technologies and innovations. So we have this mindset that it's normal. After this point, these trucks works very well. The drivers are very satisfied because of less noise, less vibrations, power very often in the truck. So especially from the drivers, we have a very good feedback from this, especially from the newest generation of electric trucks.
Great, thank you. Alexander, you mentioned, perhaps moving on to you, you mentioned that you have your targets. If I understand this correctly, you mentioned you have 93% of the emissions of your Scope 3 emissions essentially come from subcontracting parties, and you have a goal of reducing them by 30% within the next 6 years. So that is, do you have an idea of where you need to head with the zero emission share in your fleet, or in the fleet that you're essentially commanding via third parties?
So I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
What is the ramp up that you're anticipating?
Yeah, so we are starting slowly now, right? I mean, 300 truck is still, I think, honestly, a substantial share. But as you can see, we aim to increase that to more than 2,000 in then the remaining 5 years. So, I mean, our main purpose now is going from pilot testing to having this as an integrated part of how we operate. And it is a new technology. You have to handle and operate it with it differently than you used to with a diesel truck. There's range limitation. You need to use more time for refueling, in this case, recharging. So it makes some changes. But it is then our ambition to use the experience we gather this year and next year to then press on the throttle further and increasing the share of battery electric trucks. The majority will be delivered in the next phase, right, in the next 5 years from 2026 and then onwards, where we really aim to accelerate this deployment. Infrastructure is still a key obstacle, so that is also why, I mean, we are starting a bit more slow out than where we need to end up, because we need to set the charging infrastructure up and make it ready, so we can start running more and more battery electric trucks.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that. And looking at the infrastructure, indeed, you mentioned this a couple of times, and also Andre mentioned this, obviously. Is there what type of operations are you aiming for with these 300 battery electric vehicles, and where will they charge?
It's a good question. And I think I agree very much with what Andre has also put forward, that last mile distribution is, of course, the type of flow we currently see where battery electric trucks are most viable, where it's possible to deploy these because of the range fits very much. We can return to site and charge there. We don't need to rely on the availability of public charging infrastructure. But I mean, the vast majority of both DSV emissions, but also heavy good transport emissions in general in Europe, comes from the long haul activities. So that's, of course, also where we really want to be able to deploy some of these battery electric trucks. And that is what we are working very hard on, see what does that require in order to do. It would require more and more public charging infrastructure. The European Union has put forward legislation, right, and agreed on that. The mandates country to put up charging infrastructure along the highways. That, of course, helps, but it is still a bit out in the future before we really can see that being executing and have that charging infrastructure available. So currently, we see what we ourselves can do until then. That's one of the advantages of being a global company, is that we have sites all across Europe. And we can, of course, start already there with deploying the charging infrastructure. So maybe we can increase the operations where we can deploy these battery electric trucks from last mile to more regional deliveries, and then going on to cross-border and long haul deliveries.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and this sounds great. At the same time, we also, for the CO2 targets that vehicle manufacturers have to meet, but also for your own ambition that you described earlier, all of this, or most of it, will essentially have to happen in parallel, right? So starting with the regional and depot charging, I assume, regional operations is obvious. But to have, again, I refer to the earlier remarks I made, to have about a third of the new registrations of heavy-duty vehicles in Europe to be zero emission by 2030, the majority of those will have to be long haul, right? So there's a steep learning curve everyone needs to see here. Yeah. Michael, would you like to chip in here, and especially with the charging? I assume you're working closely, obviously, with your customers, and they probably approach you with all the same questions that have just been raised by Andre and Alexander. Where to charge them? What's your view on this?
Yeah, first of all, very quick test. Can you hear me better now? Or?
Yes, it's great. Now it's better.
Okay. Yeah. I think we heard it from both colleagues here, what the two main issues is. The one is, of course, financial viability. So total cost of ownership at the end. And I think we see really good examples, like the Maut implementation, for instance, in Germany. And we have, I think, the Euro-vignette policy put in place, but it's not put in place in every country, as we know. So we need to be, I think, more stringent on this. And then also, of course, it would be important to put it into place that you have a gap between driving a diesel truck and the zero-emission vehicle to really kind of turn this TCO scale towards zero emission. That helps on more the business side. And the other thing is definitely also what we heard from colleagues, and you asked rightfully so, 2/3 of heavy road transportation is on the long haul side emitting the CO2 emissions. So if we don't do all, we will not see that CO2 emissions by 2030, that's for sure, because this would mean we need to have zero emission vehicles in all other segments, including construction and so on, by 2030 to 100%. So long haul is the key, and I think the biggest issue we have there is either if it's depot or public charging, we have to really speed up and scale up the build up of the infrastructure. We have to support this industry, also to be faster. It comes to, of course, permitting, policies, for instance, investments, being able to put investments in place to see what happens, not just for the next customer, but I know I would need a lot of more power in this area. I'm allowed already to put this in, even though I know I don't need it in 26 and 27, but I need it in 2030. So we need to work on the regulation side for this. And we also need to certain programs in place. That's the one in Germany again. I think it's a good start. We call it the Initialnetz, so the first network. But to be honest and fair, there's not too much movement outside of Germany. There's some movements in Austria, Denmark, Sweden, and so on. But if you look from a truck manufacturer, and everyone will tell you the big 5 markets besides Germany is Poland, Italy, Spain, France, and the UK. Okay, it's outside of the UA, but at the end, it's one planet. So we have to make sure we move forward in these countries as well, because that's where the majority of the transportation happens.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, thanks. Perhaps this is the moment, 2 questions from the chat here. What share, and specifically to Andre and Alexander, what share of public fast charging do you expect for your long-haul applications versus depot charging? I mean, both of you mentioned there is very little. In some countries, it will well be zero publicly available or accessible dedicated truck chargers. So everything relies on depot charging. And that is obviously limiting the range. Where do you see and the range and the use cases? What is the share of public fast charging that you expect for long haul applications? How often will your long haul operations have to return to either home or to rather access a publicly accessible fast charger? Alexander, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, for the long haul, we have mandatory breaks, right? And every time the truck stands still, it's an obvious time to recharge. So once that public charging comes up and is available, well, then we can drive 4.5 hours before we need that 3/4 break. And there we rely on the availability of public charging. And then we can drive an additional approximately 4 hours, right, before the day is over nearly, and we have to either be at the site or the truck driver needs to be changed or anything else. But that's the end for that shift, right? So it means we can drive, I think, what is the average 70 kilometers per hour across Europe for a truck. And then you do the math, how often we need. Well, that's approximately every 250 or 300 kilometers that we will need some public charging infrastructure. But I think in our own honesty also can say, of course, public charging will be a huge lever for our ability to electrify long haul. But I think also Andrea mentioned to begin with, is always more fun to charge at your own sites because you have more control over price and cost. And that's, of course, plays a huge role, especially right now where we have such an expensive assets and we need to earn the money back on reduced operational costs.
And these, thank you. Andre, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I can't give today a final answer because it would be a very important question. I think it's very clear we will need in future both. We will need public charging, we will need and maybe prefer charging in our depots and our branches. What the share will be, it will depend from different topics. one of the most important things is the grid connection of a single depot, of the single branch, and that's very, very different in Europe. So there are some places we can get in future and bigger grid connections. That means more peak power for all the energy we need. But there are also some areas in Europe, or some branches where we will see no big increase of the grid connections. And I think that will then in the end will answer the questions, that will be the share. So it will be different from branch to branch or from lane to lane.
Yeah, good point. And perhaps, Michael, you would like to jump in here as well. And there's another question that I would like to weave into this here. With the lack of infrastructure, will hybridization be required to meet the 2030 targets? Michael?
Yeah, I mean, the issue with hybrid is how much CO2 you can save, right? I mean, overall, the legislation, the target is 43%. And do some, let's call it conventional measures. So we further, but if you look at the trajectory of diesel consumption went down over the last 3 years, there's no much to gain. On the aerodynamic side, with a little bit can do, but we also achieving basic you can get. The question only about the port. So from a hybrid side, it will not be enough if you basically go on hybrid full fleet to get 40%. So we basically come back to square one in it, because the end goal anyways needs to be 100%. And so for us, hybrid is a small mandate, because maybe in the next couple of years, it doesn't even have to do completely for 2030. It definitely doesn't have to in the long run. So that's why we also say, and I would say our product, the DACHSER 600, it can do the 500 kilometer. I think that describes in use case. You can run long haul with that. You can run long haul to most likely TCO parity. You run the truck only in Germany, but you cannot run the truck if you ask Andre if he get from one to the other. Maybe he's lucky to get the infrastructure, at least in people. It might work, but charge in between is basically impossible. And that's, I think, the main thing. Like I said before, we have to work on.
Yeah, I see. Very well. Thank you. And then again, there's a little audio issue. I think it's sometimes difficult to understand you. But I think we got what you the gist of it. Perhaps moving on to another range of topics here. I mean, charging. You all basically said that the infrastructure is one of the bottlenecks, one of the barriers. Perhaps is not blocking entirely the investment, at least the early investments in these vehicles. But it seems to be the case, and I think, Andre, you joked a little about this. It is, I mean, if infrastructure is a concern, then this adds to potential anxieties when it comes to the business case of the operation, right? So, but let's talk a bit about the TCO again. So you mentioned the vehicles are 2-3 times more expensive today, and at least from a vehicle manufacturer's perspective, that seems to be that will continue to be the case for a very long time, simply because of a different technology here, right? There's economies of scale, yes, but where do you see, Andre, the TCO at the moment? What's the key factors influencing them, and what needs to change to make it a viable, self-sustaining business for you?
Yeah, the key factors, I think I mentioned before, are the energy cost, of course. It's very different in Europe. What the kilowatt hour energy, especially green energy, what are the costs about it? It's a very important influencing factor. Of course, the efficiency of the electric truck itself. So what's the energy consumption of the electric trucks? And the good news is we see here a decrease of the energy consumption. So I think they will become more and more efficient in the next years. That's a very important topic, of course. So we have at the moment, a high difference between the energy costs in our own branches and in public charging. So sometimes it's more than double of the cost. So that's I think in public charging at the moment the costs are very high. If you use fast charging in public charging, the risk of the residual value of a truck is unknown to everybody of us. So I think the only way here out is a kind of risk sharing between all stakeholders. Every party has to take some of this risk, and hopefully we see in the next years that this risk of the residual value of the trucks, of the battery electric cars, become more stable, I would say. And of course, the truck toll. The truck toll is, we see, of course, here in Germany or in Austria, we have a gap of 30 and more cent per kilometer if we are talking about 40-ton trucks. And of course, that's a very important point for the TCO. If this is not available in some other countries, we have come to another TCO at the end.
Yeah.
So that are the main topics who are influencing the TCO.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, if I may, on this one, essentially there's all very different instruments, right? And you described all of them, but essentially it all boils down to carbon pricing. Would you agree?
In addition, of course, if you see an increase of cost for carbon emission for fossil fuels or diesel trucks, of course, that's an additional influence factor.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander. Any views? What's your perspective on the TCOs?
Yeah, I agree with much that has been said. Of course, there are many things that needs to change in order for the TCO difference to be comparable with what we have in operations today. I mean, prices will have to drop for the battery electric trucks. We operate in a very fragmented market with many small players, hauliers who only have a handful of trucks. And if we need to be able to convince them to make this investment, well, then the price of the vehicle itself needs to come down. Luckily, I think we experienced that some of this is already happening today, and hopefully we will see this continuing in the coming years. That said, I also think it's important to state that when we look at the current deployment and look at the markets, as I showed you on the map here, policy itself cannot help us the whole way. They can do something. In Germany, you have a very high road tax. We have the upcoming emission allowance system for fuels that will increase the cost of diesel, but that in itself will not balance the scale. What needs to change is the price of the vehicle and then the driving range. We have a type of vehicle that is much more efficient when operating than a diesel truck, which means the more we can drive with it, the more we save on the operations. So in order to balance the scale, I mean, I don't think anybody's expecting the price of the battery electric truck to come down and be comparable completely to diesel truck. But it needs to come at scale and then have a range also that allows us to drive long haul with these trucks, because then what we have invested in the asset itself, we can then earn back on operations. And that requires a longer range than what we see today.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You mentioned, I'll come back to your statement here, policy cannot help the whole way, at least. I heard you say. But with your particular role in, with respect to your subcontractors, how are you helping them to, is there anything you think you can do or can be supported better to help them transition?
Yeah, and that is, of course, something we're working very high with, and in order to give more safety and security for our subcontractors, so this becomes a a possibility for them as well. I don't have the silver bullet. I mean, it's a number of solutions we're trying to providing, co-investing together with them, making more security for them, making the infrastructure available for them so they can charge at our sites. I mean, from the obstacles we talked about throughout this session here, we are trying then to limit them for the haulier, so they at least have some security. But in the end, I mean, we have to be honest that this is an investment we need to convince the haulier of doing, sitting down with them and explaining why this is a good way, and that simply takes hard work.
Yeah, indeed. And just let me remind again, or refer back to what I said earlier. For vehicle manufacturers to be able to meet the 2030 targets, CO2 reduction targets, 45% reduction, we need about a third of all new registrations to be zero emission by 2030. So a lot, and it's important, a lot can happen and will have to happen, and starting with the bigger operators, but we will not be able to cross a certain threshold if not the small and medium-sized enterprises are part of this. Michael, what's your take? A TCO?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say if you look in the past years and maybe currently, pricing is still difficult to understand what Alexander said. But if I was launched now end of this year, becomes in a much closer range, and it's not 3 or 4 times of the cost of a long-haul diesel truck to a long-haul electric vehicle. And of course, the industry will do anything we can do to drive the cost down. But I always take one example. You go on a passenger car from, let's say, a larger piece of iron in the front, which is the engine. We have a little bit more iron because we need some more power in the truck. But you put 50 or 60 kilowatt in, or you put 600 or 700 kilowatt in the truck. Raw material is about 60% of the price of the cell. It will not even get in 5 or 10 or 20% range more expensive than diesel. It will always be quite a step more with the technology. So it will also be the reality if we keep that kind of comparison in mind. So we will drive the cost down, and I think with the improvement, and we have run our truck in a lot of tests already. Even DACHSER knows our product pretty well. You get the 500 kilometer up, 100 kilometer depending on the conditions out, but 500 kilometer like in every condition more or less, loaded, cold, and so on. So the product will be there, start production end of this year, and then I think it will make the other mechanics work. Yeah. So again, if you run it mainly on German roads, we will actually accumulate a lot of cost to the toll. We have a little bit higher energy price in Germany. It would be nice to have energy prices from other countries. I think countries have this too. And then this can really work, and it is a more cost-efficient way to run the vehicle than to run a diesel truck. And our industry works that way. Whatever is the most efficient commercial way will be used.
Very good. This is essentially, I all hear you say that it's to an extent it's about transparency, right? It's about the electricity price, of course, as as one of the drivers here on the side of the battery electric vehicles, and for that, I would say it's also about having transparency over where they are in the different countries, in different regions, in your different locations. But also about predictability, right? So a medium-term predictability that allow you to create, to make the Excel sheet calculation, basically, to create a viable strategy, a viable business case. There's a question from the chat here that I would like to take. Someone asking specifically you, Michael, but I'd also be interested to hear Alexander's and Andre's views on this. We see quite optimistic volume estimations from the OEMs for electric powertrains for 2030 and beyond. And I assume this is largely based on, of course, the CO2 regulation here. they're listening to. Do you think, Michael, that these are yet aligned with what you hear from Andre and Alexander and your customers?
Yeah, I mean, they are our customers, of course. So they can answer that even better. They think they can turn 30 to 40% of their fleet around in 2030. But for me, three things. Number one are the products, and the products are or will be there, and also in the different segments. It's not just Daimler. You can look at the other OEM. You will be able to have a heavy long-haul truck, a heavy distribution truck. You will most likely see construction vehicles, everything there. And also there in a way that you can really do the job, yeah, not just kind of carrying super light load, only warm conditions, no. So this will be there. And then, yes, we can achieve 40, 50, 60%. I mean, we can scale to whatever volume is needed in 2030. The second leg is infrastructure. If you ask me today, my confidence is very low that this will be sufficient 2030 to get to 43 or 45, including the percent, low, close to zero. This is my honest answer here. And the third one, of course, is the stringent implementation, what I said before, of toll, of energy price policy to help that. I see party movement, but also not throughout the all EU. So the confidence level there is not too high. So if you now, this is not an addition, it's a multiplication. And if two factors are very low, the chance that we see that is low. And so for us, it is also important that we talk about connecting kind of the two targets to the OEM side, of course, to the other pillars we have in place, and we have to do that early. Because if we do that in 27 or 29 to start talking about this, it is too late direct for 2030. So we have to start monitoring it in the discussions very soon.
Mm-hmm. Very well, thanks. And let me move to Andre, same question, but perhaps also as a conclusion, if you want, what would your advice be, your request or your recommendation to policymakers?
Yeah, it's not so easy to provide a very clear share or figure what is maybe the share in 2030 and so on as it is, because it depends. It depends on all the topics we have discussed, especially on infrastructure. And so that we are avoiding a little bit to make promises we cannot fulfill. So that we are at the moment we are publishing no clear figure where we are standing in 2030 and so on and so on. Of course, we have a zero emission goal for 2040 and 2050 for scope 1, 2, and scope 3. Our general strategy here is, and maybe this is the answer, we as one of the market leaders in the European land transport business, we want to be one step ahead the market. So that means the market has to move to zero emission technologies, and we want to invest in it to be one step ahead and be one of the leaders in this transition. That's our general approach, and that depends on infrastructure and so on. And what is the recommendation to policymakers? I think we need, not only us, everybody in this, every stakeholder in this transition needs safety and security for its investments. That means we need reliability of the legal framework and not every day a new discussion about what kind of driving technology can fulfill it. I think we have a regulation now. We have a review of these regulations, hopefully very soon, so that we all can rely on the framework and can invest.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Last, in view of time, thank you, Andre. Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to, is it possible to meet the targets put forward by European lawmakers and on manufacturers? I mean, in the end of the day, everything is possible. It always comes down to price. So if prices are at the right point, well, then I can definitely say it will be possible. But let's see. I mean, I agree also, Thomas, with your point. We have many moving parts here that needs to move together in order to make this possible. And that is why we in DSV has put forward such concrete plans and tried to map it out very clear, so we can provide some transparency and security both for our customers and hauliers, but also for our partners, for manufacturers like Daimler, and for charging providers to say, okay, this is where we need to move, and we need your help and support in order to make it achievable. And I think that's a sort of transparency we need, right? That is where DSV can make a difference using its enterprise scale to try to set things in motion, and then hopefully we can get the charging infrastructure up and running when you get the vehicle out there on the streets. And we will continue to do that, to put forward quite detailed roadmaps on how to achieve our targets. And I think the same goes for policymakers, to give this long-term security. What can we count on? I mean, I think the regulation on how much charging infrastructure we need to have set up, is it too soon or too far away? I won't comment on that. But I mean, at least we have some clear targets and a deadline. And that means we can work with that and make a strategy around that. And that goes for all other policy as well, to have this long-term security so we know what we have to deal with and then can strategize around it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alexander and Andre and Michael. I think that's a wrap. Thanks so much for a very insightful discussion here. A lot is obviously happening in the industry, which is a quite conservative industry technically, but it's also clear that there are still quite a few barriers and bottlenecks that we need to address. And I appreciate that many of you said we need to address them jointly and urgently to enable a swift transition here. So thanks so much for this great discussion. And stay tuned, I would say, for on our channels here for the next session of the ACEA Truck Talks. We will continue with this. Thank you so much.